You ever wish you had a crystal ball for sports? I mean, really. But what if I told you that with the right data and a little bit of code, we can get surprisingly close? Today, we're going to tackle a really fun puzzle, trying to predict sports champions before the season's even over. And we're starting with a very specific challenge.
So here it is. This is our mission for this entire explainer. Can we do it? We're not just going to guess, oh no. We're going to build a data-driven detective to see if it can sift through a whole season's worth of stats and pick out the truly elite teams. You know, the ones that land in that coveted top 4.
All right, first things first. Before our detective can even start looking for clues, we need to give it a super clear objective.
So here's the game plan. We're building a model that's basically a binary classifier. Now that sounds fancy, but all it really means is that it looks at a team's data and gives one of two simple answers. 1 if it thinks they'll finish in the top 4, and 0 if it predicts they won't. It's a clean, simple yes or no challenge, which is absolutely perfect for our data detective.
Okay, so every great detective needs clues, right? Well, in the world of data science, our clues are the data. This is the evidence, the raw material our model's going to analyze to find hidden patterns and hopefully solve the case.
So take a look at this. This is the kind of evidence we're working with. We've got the basics for each team: wins, draws, losses, total points. But look all the way to the right, that last column, top 4. That is our target. Those are the ones and zeros we just talked about. This is basically the answer key our detective is going to use to learn what a top team's stats actually look like.
In machine learning, we've got a name for these individual clues. We call them features. You can think of them like fingerprints or key pieces of evidence at a crime scene. The whole job for our model is to learn which combination of these features, wins, points, whatever, consistently points to a team being a champion.
So, we have our mission and we have our clues. Now, it's finally time to meet our detective and get its training started.
Our detective is a model called a Decision Tree Classifier, and the way it works is actually super intuitive. It basically learns by building a flowchart of simple yes or no questions. So, for example, it might learn to ask, hey, did this team get more than 70 points? If the answer is yes, it goes down one path. If it's no, it goes down another. And it keeps doing this until it reaches a final verdict, top 4 or not.
But wait, here's a really critical problem. If we just show our detective all the evidence and all the final answers, it might just memorize everything. It wouldn't actually learn to think like a detective, and it would be totally useless on a brand new case it's never seen. So we need a way to test it fairly, right?
And this is how we do it. It's a clever trick. We split our data into 3 separate piles. The biggest pile, the training set, is like all the old case files our detective gets to study to learn the patterns. Then you have the development set, which is kind of like a mock exam we use to fine-tune its skills. And finally, the test set. That's the sealed envelope, the final case it has never ever seen before. This is the true test of how good it really is.
Okay, this is where things get really fun. We don't just train one detective, we actually train a whole squad of them, and we give each one slightly different settings. Think of them as different interrogation techniques to figure out which one is the absolute best for this specific job.
So we can tweak our decision tree by changing what are called hyperparameters. These are just the settings on the machine. For instance, depth controls how many questions the model can ask in a row. A shallow tree asks just a few questions and gets a quick answer, while a deeper one is way more complex. We're going to experiment with these settings to find that perfect sweet spot.
And what's so interesting here is just how much a tiny change can totally alter the outcome. Both models you see here have a depth of 2, meaning they ask 2 questions, tops. But the one on the left gets a perfect score on our mock exam, while the one on the right, with just one slightly different internal rule, only gets a 75%. This is exactly why we have to run these tuning experiments.
So here are the results from our entire squad of detectives. We tested out all these different depths and another setting called minimum leaf size. And as you can see, a whole bunch of different setups got a perfect accuracy of 1.00 on our mock exam. So, if there's a tie, how in the world do we pick the absolute best one?
It all comes down to this moment. We've trained our models, we've tuned them, we've picked our champion detective. Now it's time to open that sealed envelope and let our best detective tackle the final, completely unseen case.
And our best detective? Well, it turns out to be the simplest one. You know, there's this guiding principle in science that says when you have a bunch of options that all work well, you should probably go with the simplest one. And in our case, our simplest model, with a max depth of just 2 questions, was the clear winner.
It's such a great reminder that more complex isn't always better. So how did our champion detective do? Let's look at the final report card. First, on the training data, the old case files it studied, it made 0 errors, a perfect score. But okay, we kind of expected that.
Next, on the development data, our mock exam, again, 0 errors, another perfect score. This tells us it really did learn its lessons well.
And now, the moment of truth. On the final, completely new, never-before-seen test data, the result is also 0 errors, a perfect score. Our simple little detective correctly identified every single top 4 team without a single mistake. It learned the pattern perfectly. A perfect score feels like magic, doesn't it? But it's not. What this really tells us is that for this particular soccer season, the connection between a team's stats and finishing in the top 4 was incredibly strong. The pattern was so clear and so obvious that even our simplest detective could solve the case flawlessly.
So let's just recap what we did here. We started with a really clear question. We gathered our data, our clues. We split that data up to make sure the test was fair, to avoid any cheating. Then we experimented to find the best detective for the job. And in the end, we found out that the simplest solution was actually the most powerful. This is the basic recipe behind so much of machine learning.
And that kind of leaves us with one big final thought. We just built a very simple model that acted like a crystal ball for elite soccer teams. If data and a few lines of code can solve this puzzle so perfectly, it really makes you wonder, what's the next great mystery, the next big question that we can answer with this exact same approach?